With that, thank you all for coming. This is just a little bit about myself. And so my name is Linda Burrows, and that is a picture of me and my family. I am the K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages Specialist here at the Department of Ed. I've been here for about a year and a half now. And prior to that, I taught public school for 20 years. I worked in the tech industry for 5 years. I mostly taught middle through high school social studies and pretty much taught every subject of social studies except for psych and soc, but I've taught AP, on-level, dual enrollment, and co-taught classes. And I was fortunate enough that I got to work on the standards committee for 2 years writing the new standards. And so that what kind of put me into this position. And that is a picture of my wonderful family. My son is now a sophomore at ASU, being a sports journalism major. My daughter is a graduate of the University of Arizona, and she's doing a State Department fellowship from home because she was supposed to be in Morocco for a year, but now she is at home because she couldn't travel overseas. And then my husband is also a social studies teacher in the Phoenix area, and my kids just totally get all irritated when we start to get into historical discussions and stuff. So that is all about me. So if I can learn a little bit about you, I'd appreciate it. If you can briefly introduce yourself into the chat, this would be your first and last name. This will also help give me a little bit of redundancy with attendance to make sure you all get credit for attending. Tell me your current position and where you teach. I like to see where in Arizona our teachers are coming from. So I'd love to know the county or wherever you happen to be teaching. That would be terrific. Oh, wonderful. Music teacher. Thank you for coming. 6th grade, Queen Creek. Fantastic. 4th through 6th grade, Tolleson. Oh, wonderful. 7th grade teacher from Yuma. Oh, your students are statewide. Oh, fantastic. 7th and 8th grade from Queen Creek, welcome. Principal in Buckeye, thank you for coming. 7th grade social studies, wonderful. So a lot of middle school people today, that's fantastic. Adult ed, oh, wonderful. Camelback Academy, middle school, 4th grade from Window Rock, welcome. It's nice and cool up there. It's actually supposed to be, I think, in the 80s here in the Phoenix area. For those of you that don't live in here, welcome. Instructional coach from Salt River. Fantastic. Thank you for coming. Great. Well, while you guys finish up with that, just so you know, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation with all of the hyperlinks within a week. Sometimes I get it done a little bit faster. At that point in time, once you receive that confirmation email from me with the resources, your attendance will be marked as completed in the ADE Connect system. And then that's the same system that you registered for this webinar. So you can go back into that system, and at the top of the screen, there will be a small completed button, and you can click on that button and it will list all of the trainings that you've taken with ADE. And then you can print off the certificates as you need as we go forward. All right, so today we are focusing on inquiry part 2, and we're really going to look at inquiry with regards to questions. And so we're going to examine compelling questions. What are the components and types of compelling questions that we should be looking at? Then look at those scaffolding or supporting questions. And then also, because, inquiry is more than just doing a kind of what I call a formal inquiry, like a DBQ or an inquiry through the C3. It's also just about questions and getting kids and your students to question everything that they're doing, right? And backing up those thoughts with evidence. And so we're going to look at the question formulation technique and practice with resources. So that is the ideas. I want you guys to have some ideas that you can take with and use right away as you go into your classes. So real quick, I want to know from you. So I liked this quote. I thought it was really interesting. This is from a French playwright. Ignacio Eugene Ionesco, excuse me, and he's a French-Romanian playwright, and he says, "It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question." And so what I'd like to know from you in the chat, just take kind of a few minutes and share, how do you currently use questions in your classrooms? Are your questions teacher generated? Are they student generated? What are some of the benefits that you've had and successes that you've had with questioning? And then what are some of the challenges that you guys have had with regards to inquiry and questions? So if you can just take a minute and type that into the chat, I'd appreciate it. Teacher generated, good. Oh, I like the idea of a challenge question. What does it mean? Agree with the decision? Oh, that's a good one too, yeah. Oh, fantastic, deep dive. A mix between teacher and student, good. Bombarded with both teachers and students, yep, I get that. Let's see, student and led, working on DOK questions, good. Oh, group investigations, interesting. Combination of student and teacher generated, wonderful. Okay. Quick 200 questions, one pagers, oh, awesome. Fantastic. I love using Socratic seminars with my kids. I got turned on to that, I don't know, in the early 2000s, I want to say, and have found it to be so beneficial. And it kind of has led into my my mantra with, you know, before I left the classroom, is all about the fact that I prep more and teach less. And Socratic seminars were a big part of that. Wonderful. By focused note taking. Oh, good. Okay, teacher generated. Oh, good. Text strategies in which they're adding missing components. Oh, I like that. That's fantastic. Awesome. All right. So real quick, I just have this short video and it's just a few minutes, but in this is Kathy Swan that is actually talking, and she is one of the founders basically that created and came up with the C3 inquiries, which is the one we're going to focus on and look at what those questions are and that technique. And she's just going to describe this here. If you cannot hear this, please type it in the chat and we'll do some troubleshooting just in case. Oops.
As you remember, the C3 framework represents ideas that ambitious social studies teachers have long believed in practice. These core ideas are represented by an inquiry arc that is made up of 4 dimensions. In the next 4 weeks of this course, we will begin to zoom in on each of the dimensions. This week, our focus is Dimension 1, developing questions and planning inquiries. In the C3 framework, we work to define 2 types of questions that anchor and sustain an inquiry: compelling and supporting questions. I would like to define compelling questions and provide some characteristics of these kinds of questions. Compelling questions are those thorny questions that get under students' skin.
What could happen to stuff over time?
They should emerge from the interest of students and their curiosity about how things work. But they are also grounded in curriculum and content with which students might have little experience. Compelling questions address problems and issues found in and across the academic disciplines of the social studies. They require students to apply disciplinary concepts and to construct arguments and interpretations. In short, compelling questions are provocative, engaging, and worth spending time on. Examples of compelling questions include the following. How should history remember John Brown? Was the civil rights movement of the 1960s a success? Is violence ever justified? When did Americans gain their liberty? Please note that all of these questions are worded in such a way that fulfill two important criteria. Compelling questions must be 1, intellectually meaty, and 2, student-friendly. First, let's talk about how compelling questions are intellectually meaty. If we look at the compelling question, when did Americans gain their liberty? We recognize that the question represents a continuing struggle for some Americans. Some social scientists might argue that 1776 represents the date in which Americans gained their liberty. Others might argue liberty was gained after the Emancipation Proclamation or after women gained the right to vote. Still others might argue that many Americans are still fighting for liberty, that the American story of freedom is still unfolding, and we have unfinished business with regard to rights for all people. At first glance, you might think that it's a history question since it begins with when, signaling time. But to fully explore the question, you would need to engage geographic, economic, and political lenses or perspectives. For example, am I talking about economic liberty, political liberty? The question is clearly intellectually meaty. Let's take a look at the second criteria, student-friendly. By student-friendly, I mean a question that reflects some quality that teachers know students care about. It also means they're accessible to students and interesting to the age group you're working with. Let's return to the liberty question. When did Americans gain their liberty? How does that question reflect what students care about? Well, clearly, this is a little trickier in that we need to put ourselves in the shoes of students. What do kids care about? What gets under their skin? The students I know seem to care about fairness, possessions, rules, friendship, and also conflict. Not necessarily a military conflict, although blood and guts does have a certain appeal these days. In this case, it's a conflict of ideas. The question, when did Americans gain their liberty, presents a conflict of concepts of being an American and liberty. In essence, the question puts the students in a position to say, it depends. It depends on how you define liberty, and it depends on how you define American. You could replace American with the name of a student or a group of students. For example, when did Kathy gain her liberty? When do 12th graders gain their liberty? When do teenagers gain their liberty? As you can see, liberty's got legs. An important note about compelling questions is that they should be clear. This is really part of being student-friendly. As you construct compelling questions, think about your wording. Strip away words and phrases that would be a turnoff or inaccessible to kids. Students don't need to understand every word in a question, at least initially, but the question should be designed to have a simple elegance. Similar to writing poetry, spend time on each word and don't be afraid to be a bit playful. Lastly, don't get discouraged. All of us struggle with writing compelling questions. Let's take a look at the graphic that is also on page 30 of the C3 framework. You will see a series of disciplinary, compelling questions around the broader question, what does liberty look like? Do you know that that took me 4 full days to create? And I called 4 different people to help me with those questions. So if you get stuck, ask for help. Or better yet, ask your students to help. In the end, all social studies students should have a chance to ask their own compelling questions and to go in search of answers to those questions that they find particularly interesting. I challenge you to take a question you use with your students right now and give it a compelling question test. Is it intellectually meaty? How so? Will it appeal to something kids care about? Again, how so? If it doesn't work as a compelling question, try rewriting it. Work with it until it meets the 2 criteria and then give it a test drive. pull a group of students aside and see if you can engage them in the question. If they get hooked into an engaging conversation with you and the other students, asking additional questions or demonstrating strong feeling about the answer, guess what? You got it. You know you have a winner.
All right. Okay, so like she had said much more articulately than I could, there are certain components of questions and compelling questions when we want to do inquiry with our students that really matter and kind of hold sway with them. And so a compelling question needs to have a reasonable amount of content, but it needs to have that meatiness that she referred to, right? It needs to have some kind of depth to it. It also needs to hold a sustained interest of the kids. So it should be something that can't be accomplished super easy, right? And that kind of gets to the overall meatiness of that question. It should have suitable resources available for the kids to look up, both primary and secondary sources. So that way they see what they're doing and how they're working with it. It also needs to be challenging for the grade level and developmentally appropriate, depending upon, the questions that you ask a fourth grader are going to be a little different than the types of questions you ask, say, a seventh grader. That will be different than the questions you ask an 11th grader. And so you have to make sure that even though it may be the same topic, the questions are grade level appropriate. It does require disciplinary skills and processes. So this is where we want our kids to be doing the work of historians, doing the work of geographers, doing the work of political scientists, and actually using these documents, coming up with evidence and then writing about it, or having some other kind of deliverable with it. They can be debatable, so they definitely don't have any kind of right or wrong answer. And they definitely represent important issues that are both historically and contemporarily important. And so this is where we want to make our questions relevant to our students. We want them to care about what we are doing. So compelling questions, the difference between using questions in your class as checks for understanding and, using questions with regards to framing your teaching and learning really kind of goes to the type of what compelling question you do. So we've already kind of talked a lot about that intellectual meatiness, but it needs to be something that is what we call an open-ended question. And an open-ended question is something that there's no necessarily set answer. And so you can have children answer your question, or students answer your question in 2, 3, maybe even 4 different ways. And all those ways can be correct because it depends upon which pieces of evidence they use. And that's kind of that key to it. So they're open to multiple answers, open to multiple interpretations. They're provocative and engaging, and then student-friendly and intellectually meaty, excuse me. So I told you guys the link, and let me go out and I'll put this in the chat for those of you that were unable to do this earlier. So that way you can access it. But this is one I just thought would be kind of in the middle of the road, depending upon the grade levels that we had today. So in this case, this is an actual C3 inquiry from the C3 teachers.org. It is all free. It is open education resource, which means you can use all of it. You can use part of it. You can mix and match things. Oh, is content being blocked? Here, let me make sure we can see this. I'll start sharing again. How's that? Can you guys see it slide? And so it's the questions, in this case, the compelling question for Uncle Tom's Cabin is, can words lead to war? And so it is something that you could say yes with a reason why, you could say no with a reason why, and then you could also say, well, it depends, right? Sometimes it may, and sometimes it may not. So here I want to kind of just practice with you guys a couple of compelling questions and see if you guys think these are good compelling questions or not. So I'm just going to have you type yes or if this is a compelling question. If you think no, then go ahead and type no into the chat box. So this first question here, do we need rules? Do you think that makes a good compelling question, or no, not a good compelling question? So if you could type yes or no into the chat for me. Let's see, we've got a couple of no's. Okay, mostly no's. Yes. Okay, I would actually argue that this is a good compelling question. And the reason why it's a good compelling question is, one, it is open-ended, right? Why do we need rules is something that you could have multiple different answers for that. You could have political reasons, you could have economic reasons, you could have, you know, cultural and social reasons, right? So there are lots of different ways in which you could answer it, depending upon how, and the evidence that you give your kids, the primary and secondary sources. It could be, it's open-ended, it's got an intellectual meatiness to it, because you could get really in depth, especially with older students, or you could keep it maybe more simple with, you know, say kindergartners or first grade students, right? It also is relevant to students, so students are going to find something like this interesting and engaging to them, as well as it's got that ability to kind of be sustained, like you could add more to it. So I would actually argue that this would be a good compelling question. What about this one? What are the 5 largest sources of oil for US markets? Would this be yes, a compelling question, or no, not a compelling question? Definitely, I agree. This is not a good compelling question. The reason being, it's a closed-ended question, right? There's no debate, there's no argument associated with it. It would be something that would be very finite and easy to find the answer to. Now, could this question be maybe a scaffolded question as you're looking at a larger question, maybe about energy resources or use of fossil fuels or something along those lines? Then it could be a supporting kind of question in that way. But as it is written right now, I would say no, that is not a good compelling question. Next one, why is Albany the capital of New York? Would you say yes, this is a compelling question, or no, this is not a compelling question? Got some yeses, a no, some yeses. Okay. More yeses than nos. In this case, I would say yes, this is a good compelling question. And the reason for that is because New York, like Arizona, has actually had multiple cities be the state capital. And so, in fact, this would be a great one in which, because these are all open education resources, this actually is an inquiry on the C3. You could take this and adapt it. And like if you teach 3rd grade, for example, which is Arizona standards, adapt it to be, why is Phoenix the capital of Arizona? You know, at one point in time, it was Prescott. At another point in time, it was Tucson. So why did it end up in Phoenix ultimately? And so that's something that you can argue and look at. So again, it could be relevant to students as it goes, and it's got that kind of that debatable open-endedness. Who are our community helpers? Would you say this would be a compelling question, yes or no? Good, maybe a why as opposed to what. Let's see, we've got some yeses and some nos. in this case, because you're just asking who are our community helpers, I would honestly say no. I think it's a little too narrow. However, I think it is on that verge of being a compelling question. If maybe you just reworked the question, tweaked it a little, it could get a little bit more meatier. It could also, if you could have maybe some tie to students, right, that could then bring that into more meatiness. Could the argument be made that community could be the crux of the question? Absolutely. Like, what is community? Who is community? I think that is something, how you define that. Absolutely. So depending upon how you take that idea, it could develop. Absolutely. What makes a community helper? Yeah, great. I like that. Exactly. Because that goes back to what Joseph said, right? So how do we define community? What I think of community may be different than what your students think of community. And so all of that makes for some really good discussion and argumentations and debates. Yeah, perfect way to rewrite it. Here's another one. Can Canada and the US be friends forever? Yes or no? Is this a good, compelling question? I would say yes, this could be a good, compelling question. And the reason being, it is open-ended, it is open to interpretation, it is worded a little, juvenile, I guess, if you talk about, talking about the US and Canada being friends forever. And so, but by the same token, can students relate to a concept like that, right? Can they understand the idea of being, friends and what that might define? Definitely scalable for depth of knowledge. Yep, absolutely. All right, last one, and then we'll move on. Who won the Cold War? Could this be a compelling question, yes or no? What do you guys think? Yeah, it looks like most of you are saying yes, and I would completely agree. I do think it's open to interpretation, right? What do you mean by won the Cold War? What does that look like? What does that mean? Just because the Soviet Union isn't around, does that mean the US still won? And what did we win in that point? So I definitely think it's that, open to interpretation, that intellectual meatiness. You can relate it to today, right? As we've got, conflicts around the world and conflicts with Russia, right? You can definitely get into that idea of, who won the Cold War. All right, fantastic. So when we're creating compelling questions, and they are truly hard to write a really good, compelling question that's got, a lot of multiple answers, right? You want to start backwards. And so you want to look at, okay, where do we want our kids to come up with? And this is where I get to my mantra of prep more and teach less, right? I want my kids to get that content and internalize it and get to that place on their own, rather than me being the one that just gives them that information, through whatever more teacher-driven directives that I may use. Now, that's not to say that lecture doesn't have its place, because it absolutely does. It is one tool in your toolbox, so to speak, but research shows that students will retain more information when they're really engaged in that information of being historians. So you want to, when you're looking at them, think of where you want your kids to end up. What content do you want them to have at the end of that inquiry? What ideas, what concepts, what skills should they have mastered or be practicing at the end of that inquiry? And then look for those big ideas. Definitely issues and conflicts make for really good and easy, compelling questions. Geography themes, and this is something I think a lot of people, the ideas of migration and push and pull factors and the economics of things, especially now that economics right, is required to be taught K-12, which is a little intimidating, especially for elementary teachers. So it's like, wait, I've never had an economics class. How in the heck am I supposed to be teaching this? But a lot of these compelling questions have economic components to it, right? Supply and demand. And you've got questions of, you know, your choices and the opportunity cost of doing something versus doing nothing. And so there are a lot of economics in these things that can lead to really good and easy, compelling questions. Again, compelling questions always will have no right answer. You should have multiple ways to answer that. And they need to be designed to provoke and sustain inquiry, right? You want your kids to go out of your classroom and still be arguing about it, right? And talking about it and discussing it. And you've got, you know, that kid that pops in at lunch because they're just so perplexed and they want to clear something up. Or, you know, you've got kids that come in to your class before school even starts because they're wanting to go over something with you and, oh, they thought of something and looked something up last night, right? And so that's what you want, that sustained inquiry that gets those kids excited in it. All right, so I thought it might be interesting, and this worked really well last time. I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms for just a little bit. I did ask you to bring a topic. If you didn't bring a topic, I thought coming up with a COVID compelling question would be great. And so what I'm going to do, let's see, we have got 18 of us here. I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms for, I'm just going to give you like 5 to 7 minutes, depending upon how you guys are working, to come up with a compelling question, either about about COVID, or you can use a topic. Maybe you have a unit that you're coming up with that you really would like some ideas to flesh this out, and you've got this great, you know, collegial group here now that you can, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. So let me put, let's see, let's see, if we do 4 groups, that would be about 4 to 5 people in a group. So I'm going to go ahead and put you into your groups. I will pop in to check on you guys. I'm just going to do like 5 minutes to 7 minutes. If we need more time to that way, give you that time to see if you can come up with a compelling question, either about COVID or about some topic maybe that you had. Any questions before I begin? Yeah, you should be able to type it. Yeah, because I'm going to ask you guys what you found in your question in your breakout rooms. All right, I'm going to go ahead and create the rooms, and it should put you in there. All right, let's open all these up. All righty. It's just going to take a minute here. Okay. So I popped into a couple of all of the breakout rooms, and some of you guys are having some amazing discussions. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen here. What about, I saw in the chats also some of you guys going through and having just some really fantastic contributions and ideas. Does anyone want to share or had one that they were particularly like interested in, or something that kind of really got their creative juices flowing?
This is April Johnson. In my breakout group, the music teacher had a really good idea about social distancing and what it would look like in the classroom. And then because we know there's a lot of information out there in which the, social distancing guideline varies depending on the source. So that could be a good conversation. And I think, I could see that working across different grade levels.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, I like that one. Yeah, that is good.
And then it can even lead into research of social distancing and then looking at those sources and then getting more into, are they reliable resources and, fact checking.
I love that idea. And I love that idea that too, you can also then use it to maybe partner with, if you teach in a self-contained class, right? Because you said you can level it up or level it down depending upon your students, and
Right.
if you're in a self-contained sixth grade class, what a great way that you're doing now social studies and science and some ELA because you're writing stuff up, right? And you're working smarter, not harder, and doing so many standards just with one inquiry. Or if you're in maybe a middle or a high school class, how terrific that you can partner with, the science teacher down the hall and, kind of create something where you're doing, working with them to come up with some, look at maybe some scientific data that they may have and all of that. I think that's fantastic.
And you can also relate it into math as well, because now you get into that statistics and data piece, and they can maybe, walk around campus and observe, social distancing and then chart it.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, all the skills that kids could learn and coming up with like infographics and then you could do some kind of like service learning thing with it too, from a school component where, hey, we're going to post signs around the school about what really is service social distancing and what is effective, and you're not far enough apart, or coming up with something cute and quirky and catchy that's going to get with kids. I think that's got a lot of longevity. That's a fantastic idea. Great job. Does anyone else have another one that they would like to share?
This is Joseph Hager. I talked a lot in my group, and so I apologize for those of you that were there for continuing to talk. But my students, right after the Capitol riots, we were in Zoom, hanging out before class officially started, and some of them were asking questions about the riots and what the outcome could be and consequences and such. And we really started talking about where, this is an American history class, and so our founding documents and our current, government documents, and kind of taking that conversation, the student's natural inquiry, but then turning it into a compelling question. I came up with something like, what is power? Who or what defines power? Do our documents, give power to the people? And kind of engaging with a very current event there. It's not very fully formed, but trying to move in that direction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's especially with an event like that, regardless of your political beliefs, right? Kids are going to have questions about it. They want to know what's going on with it. And, that's where we as teachers have to really help them to investigate that, and using inquiry and using our compelling questions is a fantastic way that you can do something like that in an apolitical setting, right? Where you're looking at, okay, what is power and what do the documents say? And, that kind of a thing. I think that's fantastic. Oh, I like Vanita, yours, can schools reopen safely during COVID? Oh, fantastic. That's a good one too. So there are lots of these, and you can see, and this is one thing that I love, right? When you stick teachers in, educators in a room, right, you're going to start feeding off of each other and like, oh, well, that's a great idea. And oh, here's something else I was thinking of. So I found a bunch of COVID compelling questions, since that was, you know, something that is really on the minds of people and, you know, obviously very relevant to us today. So you guys will get all of these, but I've kind of listed them out. Like here are a bunch of like civics related COVID questions. I've got economics COVID questions, geography COVID questions, and history COVID questions. And so I've got all of these, and you'll get this when I do the attendance in the week. But I want to kind of move on. I think you guys have got that idea of you know, what is a compelling question, right? We want it to engage our students and we want it to go further. And then how do they answer those compelling questions? And that's really through supporting questions. And so supporting questions are those scaffolded, more closed-ended questions that help answer the larger questions. You know, when you talk about like, well, what is power? You know, how do we define power, right? What do our founding documents say? Or can schools reopen safely? You know, you look up and say, well, what are the recommendations from the CDC? And what does that mean for schools? And so there are all sorts of primary and secondary sources that you can use with that. I'm going to show just a little bit of this video real quick here, because I don't want to get through all of it. But this is Kathy Swan again going over supporting questions, but I'm just going to show you a piece of it and not show you the entire thing. Oh, okay. Thank you. No sound. I think when I shared it again, I forgot to include sound. Let's try that again. Shall we? All right, here we go. Let's fast forward a little bit.
Supporting questions are the
How's
second
that?
type of questions that the C3 framework defines.
Perfect, thank you.
Supporting questions focus on descriptions, definitions, and processes on which there's general agreement within the social studies disciplines. I like to think of supporting questions as questions that nestle underneath the compelling question. They serve as building blocks within the larger inquiry and help students chip away at the compelling question. In this way, they don't simply stand alone, but they serve an important purpose: to help and guide an inquiry forward. Let's start with the compelling question. Was the American Revolution revolutionary? A supporting question might be, what were the regulations placed on the colonists under the Townshend Act? As students begin to think about the revolutionary nature of the American Revolution, they will want to know about the economic interests of the colonists and the extent to which those interests were being curtailed. Knowing about the various acts that were placed upon the colonists helps students understand the nature of the revolution. This supporting question thus moves the inquiry forward. Here's another example. The Smithsonian asked the compelling question, what is John Brown's legacy? In order to answer this question, students would have to take a close look at the raid on Harper's Ferry. Thus, a supporting question might be, who was involved in the raid on Harper's Ferry? Or what happened during the raid at Harper's Ferry?
All right, that just shows you a little bit and gives you this idea that, again, supporting questions, this is where your kids are getting that content. And that's the thing I think a lot of teachers always wonder, well, if I'm not teaching and I'm not giving them the content, how are the kids getting that content? And it really is through these supporting questions, right? This is where you have the processes and the descriptions. And so in the example that I had sent out to you guys earlier about Uncle Tom's Cabin, can words lead to war? The supporting questions that go with it are these listed, like how did Harriet Beecher Stowe describe slavery in Uncle Tom's Cabin? What led Harriet Beecher Stowe to write Uncle Tom's Cabin? How did people in the North and South react to Uncle Tom's Cabin? And then how did Uncle Tom's Cabin affect abolitionism? So all of those have then primary sources that kids can look up, they can annotate. You can do all different kinds of formative tasks with each one of those to ultimately lead the kids to answer the larger question of, can words lead to war? So I want to just take a minute here, and we're going to go out to Jamboard. This is kind of my new favorite thing here. And let's see, I'm going to take us out there. Oh, where is it here? Here we go. And hopefully you guys can see my internet here. And I'm gonna, let's see, share this, make sure I've got the copy, make sure the links are all on. I'm gonna put this in the chat and have you guys go out here. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, this is actually something that's I found to be really helpful and fun as we're going through it. But what you do is you just, we're gonna kind of brainstorm some supporting possible questions. So if we take one of our brain breakout questions here, which I'm just gonna kind of look through the chat, and let's see, let's just use Vanita's here because I can see it. Can schools reopen safely, right? So that's our compelling question. So what you can do is you come down here, and in this toolbar over here, you can click on the sticky note here, which is the fourth one down. And I want you to brainstorm and ask and type some supporting questions that what might be some supporting questions that could help us answer, can schools reopen safely? So for example, I said one earlier that'd be like, what are the CDC guidelines to reopen schools? And you just click save. And then the nice thing is you can take that and move that down here as some supported questions. So just what might be some questions? Oh, what does safety entail? Oh God, that's a good one. I like that. Again, that's one of those words that it's like, well, what does safety mean, right? Oh, what should parents and students do in order to make schools can open safely? Oh, that's a good one too. That's great. I'm gonna move that one down here. So this is, as we're doing this is what they talked about earlier about kind of testing the question, right? And so this is where you can go in, and when you have a compelling question like, can schools reopen safely? You want to take the time, or maybe have a couple kids or a colleague do this where it's like, okay, are there multiple questions that can help answer it? How do we do it? What underlying health issues are facing our students? That's great too. You know, you can get into the economics of it. How much will it cost to clean schools efficiently, right? Another one I just thought of, right? The nice thing with this that you can do is you can have students answer in one color, and maybe you can give feedback in a different color. You can have kids draw with this if you're unfamiliar, where it's like, oh, okay, circle the items you like best, right? You can, you know, go through and do that kind of a thing. You can erase stuff, which is nice on here. If you haven't used Jamboard, you can also upload images, you can do shapes. There are all sorts of neat things you can do with Jamboard. So I just wanted to take a minute and show you that. Oh, should schools open fully or partially? Necessary resources. Oh, you guys have got some great questions. So that's just a little taste of what we do when we want to work with supporting questions. And I'm unfortunately going to hurry us along because I notice we really have 4 minutes left and I want to respect your time. So let's go ahead and go. So as we go through our process, right, we have compelling questions, Supporting questions are where you get into that content and the details of it. And we want our kids to then use those questions to finally make that argument that then answers that compelling question. So keeping in mind that, you know, for purposes of social studies, and really for almost anything, when you have an argument, it's a collection of claims that is supported by that relevant evidence. And so this is where we want kids using sources, being media literate, right? We want to teach them media literacy skills, regardless of what content area we're teaching. So that way, then they can also develop not only their claim, but then recognize other people's claims. And I think, if anything, you know, what happened on January 6th has shown us that, you know, there's a lot that we need to do as a community, as a nation, to really understand and be able to listen and civilly talk to one another. And I think that's why social studies, you know, this is kind of the year of the social studies teacher in my mind, because we do need this more and more. And so that's kind of the whole point, right? We want our kids to be able to answer that argument with evidence. And so again, scaffolding argument stems are when you maybe give kids some of those helps to answer them. So in this case, your supporting question might be, you know, you give them part of this phrase, right? Where words can lead to war when people use those words to express disagreements with others, right? And you can say words can lead to war when, and then you let the kids fill in the rest. And this is also part of kind of stress testing those questions, right? The causes of civil war are very complicated, and it can't be boiled down to words like in Uncle Tom's Cabin. So there are many different ways in which you can give argument stems to your kids, giving them partial stems to help prompt them. It's also a good way too that you can help kids maybe with IEPs that are in your classes that maybe need some extra help too. And that's a third one that I have as an example. So obviously inquiry in the C3 is great, but there are tons of other ways to get inquiry into your classrooms. And so this is the question formulation technique, which is really just all about producing questions and coming up with questions. And I'm going to zoom through this super fast, but you guys will get all of this when I send you this in a week or in a few days. So producing questions, you just want kids to ask as many questions as they possibly can. Don't stop, write down everything. You're not editing, you're just going through questions, right? So for example, if you took this painting called American Progress from 1872 and you're just like, okay, what questions do you have? And this is my big spiel for using art in social studies. I think there is nothing more important than using art and images in our social studies classes, and they are primary and secondary sources for our students. So again, you want to ask your kids as many questions as you can. You don't want them to, you know, stop. You want to just keep, what are you seeing? What are you doing? And I always like telling kids to like look at the quadrants. So what's going on in the top right versus the top left, all of that. You can also maybe just show them part of the picture, like a hide and reveal kind of thing, and have them ask questions. Again, that's the questioning technique, and it's a great way to do this as a starter, or maybe you could use it as a formative assessment. You want to have kids then improve your questions as they go through, changing maybe from an open-ended to a closed-ended or vice versa kind of thing. Are all great. Prioritizing and strategizing your questions, right? What are the 3 most important questions, vice versa, and then always reflect. Reflecting with questions is really, really huge. All right, our time is up, and I went through that last little bit, so please, if you have any questions, let me know. I am constantly doing professional development, and we have our partners that do training. So you will get this if you don't have the QR code that you can take your phone and kind of grab a snapshot of it. But it's always getting updated with some great trainings. We've got some great trainings from Echoes and Reflections coming up, and we're going to be doing a summer seminar series from mid-June to mid-July, where we're going to have a bunch of just teacher leaders presenting all sorts of great subjects to you guys. Also, check out our website. We've got ELA, Social Studies, and ELP Crosswalk. This resources section up here is fantastic with resources all by grade level. I do a newsletter once a month that if you're interested in joining, I send it out at the beginning of the month. Sign up for that. We also have recorded web videos and stuff out there too, are all great. Oh, I like that idea of musical chairs like that. That's a great idea. And real quick, I'm a minute over. I'm so sorry. If you can type your name into the chat box, first and last name, for me. I thank you all for coming and for this hurried, kind of quick end to it. But I think we had some great discussions. I appreciate it. You should get your email from me that says your attendance has been completed within a week, and you will have all of the resources and links. And with that, I want to say thank you very, very much for coming. Have a great afternoon. Please email me. You all have my email address. My job is to serve you. I teach teachers now and I love it. And if you need something or you're stuck with something, please reach out to me, and have a great afternoon and stay safe, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting for everyone. I've got the attendance, so I think we are good. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.